When I left Team Gary, I was like out on my own, and I realized I was very, very affected.
What were you as a kid?
Most recently directed his third Netflix special.
Hassan Minaj.
What was your first encounter with Gary?
This is crazy. I don't even know if I ever really said this. I got this very sweet email one day, and they were like, "Hey, so sorry, been great, but next week's gonna be your last week." I basically straight up in the car was like, "I want D-Rock's job." It's not an easy team to work on by any means. There was a point in my life where like the idea of being on Gary's team was the end goal. And whenever I was there, it was this all encompassing. It was just, it was what my identity was. Like everything was being on Team Gary. My name is Tyler Babin. This is episode 1 of WhiteSpace with Citisteer.
The concept behind the podcast is to bring the humans behind Gary's brand to the real world in the most humanized way, and less about your work and more about you as a human.
Okay.
So the first question that I have for you that really would kind of map this out is, what were you as a kid? And why do you think that has brought you to where you are today?
What do you classify as kid?
First memory.
First memory. Because I've always been, I think, kind of naturally very adventurous. Even, if we really go back to earliest memories, I treated like my childhood home like a jungle gym. Like I was always climbing around and like jumping over things. And then when I was very young, I grew up in the South, so maybe it is more normal to do there, but I got like this little ATV whenever I was like 3 years old or something. And I would like, drive it way too fast and jump off ramps and just do like very reckless things. So I feel like that's who I was as a kid. And then that evolved. I feel like if I actually examine it, each thing was sort of a domino that is like led here, that in retrospect, all seems very clear. So with kind of this adventurous kid, got really into like skateboarding, in my like, preteen into teenage years. There's a huge component to skateboarding, which is the documentation of it. So I wasn't that good at skateboarding. I was okay, but I like wasn't great. But my friends were really good. And I sort of naturally became like the guy with the camera filming all these things. And then that leaned into another passion that I'm like very deep about, which is magic and sleight of hand. Where I grew up, there was no one who was also into this, but I found this online community that was huge, and people were into like cardistry, which is the art of shuffling cards in fancy ways. And so I started making videos of myself, like in my bedroom, doing magic tricks and like playing with cards and uploading those to YouTube in its very early years. And yeah, like each of these things has gotten me closer and closer to the thing that I'm like most passionate about, which is like telling stories and making films through visual medium. So video, photography, design are like the 3 things that I most closely attached to. And I feel like if you look back, like it all kind of naturally progressed to this point from what I was as a kid, which was just into, I think, adventures and running around.
Love that. It's funny how like when you look back in your life, like you can always feel like you could see how every different phase of your life kind of like
how hindsight's 2020.
And so what do you do now?
I live and work as a director and creative director with a bunch of different people and brands over the last 4 years, almost to the day, June 1st, 2021. I started working with Hassan Minaj. It started as him reaching out and just saying, "Hey, I'm going on tour. I need someone to come shoot it." And then actually like building and growing a production company with him, and most recently directed his third Netflix special off of his head.
That's so cool, because I know how much you've always had that as one milestone in your life that you always wanted to get to. And getting there, like it's just such a fun experience to see people around you doing things they actually wanted to do. Let's take a step back and go to like the beginning.
Yeah.
What was your first encounter with Gary?
This is crazy. I don't know if I definitely haven't told you this. I don't even know if I've ever like said this. It wasn't video and it wasn't content. I was at a Barnes & Noble in Tallahassee, Florida, in 2011 and found a copy of Crush It. Was just happened to pick it up in like the self-help like business section, one of those, and was super into it. So I found Crush It after it had been out for a couple of years, and then Jab 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 Right Hook was coming out. I had skipped over Thank You Economy, but then he was going on the Chase Jarvis live show, probably like 2013. Yeah, that's right. And so he was going on Chase Jarvis live, and I was a huge Chase Jarvis fan. And so I'd seen the interview and then realized I had Crush It in my room. Like I already read it and just didn't connect like who he was outside of this one book. And then I remember watching the Chase Jarvis live and I was like, I think I should go work for this guy. Like, I remember having that like very real thought. I would followed him and started just like watching very closely. And then it was not too long after that, the Ask GaryVee show was like up and running. And
2015.
Yeah, there was, I forget what those
Well, actually, that was 2014.
2014.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, it would have been like the next year. And I remember I had watched for a while and something happened. There was some sort of event taking place where the team was looking to bring on a video person, or it was a contest that someone was getting flown to New York. I don't remember what it was, but I made a video for the team.
It was Ask GaryVee 126.
Yeah, okay, maybe it was,
It was the 1-year anniversary, and 3 winners were going to fly in to New York.
Yeah. Anyway, I remember I made a video and I remember being like, India, D-Rock. Like I would like list off the people and I was like, I'm a huge fan and all that stuff, and like never heard anything back. But still just continued like prying into that world, trying to figure out how to get involved. I knew I wanted to live in New York. And I had always been like really bad in school. I was going to community college at the time, but I was like flunking out. It just wasn't like I wasn't involved in that at all. And Gary, especially in that era, 2014, 2015, 2016, was very much like, fuck Saturn, I want to go do this. And so I was like, this makes sense. This resonates. And so just like kept an eye on things. And I knew I wanted to live in New York. So I started applying to like every internship I could find in New York. And not a single one hit me back other than VaynerMedia. And it was at like 10 p.m. on a random day, and they asked if I could be in New York in 2 weeks. And I didn't know anyone. I had money saved up.
What was the role?
It was design intern. Yeah, design intern. VaynerMedia hits me back. They asked me if I can be there in 2 weeks. I just, through happenstance, happened to find someone who has an apartment with a room available. And I moved. And I started January of 2016 as a design intern on Budweiser.
What was your first encounter with Gary? I think a lot of people already know it. How do you make the Uber happen?
The first encounter with Gary was actually getting into an elevator with him, just like in passing, like on my way to lunch one day. And he said, hey. And I said, hey. But I was so fucking nervous that I just said nothing. I just kind of like waved and I was like, hey, and I think he could tell how nervous I was. DailyVee was still very new. The Uber conversation that people know of was DailyVee 38. Mm-hmm. And so there hadn't been that many DailyVee. And I remember Gary D-Rock walked into my orientation class, like filming DailyVee. And like Gary like waves at everyone and just like kind of made a moment of it. We didn't have an interview.
Did you make it to the DailyVee?
It was in the DailyVee, but I wasn't in it. I was like behind a door, cut away. But how did we make the Uber happen? So I had been fighting really hard to get like a real job. I never came to Vayner with the anticipation that it was going to be an internship. I walked in and I was like, I'm going to figure out how to turn this into a job. Because I had decided that like I wasn't going to go back to Florida. I wasn't going to go back to school. I was done. This was like I was starting a new chapter of life. And there wasn't a job for me. Like it just got to the end. There was this like creative hiring freeze of like they were figuring out the whole creative department, the design department. And so I got this very sweet email one day and they were like, hey, so sorry, you've been great, but next week's going to be your last week. And so I emailed Gary. I just like opened up new tab immediately. And I was like, at a minimum, let me say, hey. And I didn't actually think I was going to shoot my shot as hard as I did in the Uber. I was like, let me just say, hey. It was just happenstance that Gary was running super late. And Tyler Schmidt was like, hey, he won't have time to meet with you unless you're down there just like ride in the car with him. And I was like, I'll ride in the car with him. Yeah. And so I'm like spit out onto the street, 23rd Park, where the old office was. I get into a back maneuver. I'm sandwiched. It's Gary, me in the middle, and the D-Rock on the other side of us filming. And I remember I haven't watched the raw footage in a very long time, but I was so nervous. And Gary was just like, so talk to me. And I was like, I've been a design intern. I want to work on your team. I just it all like spewed out of me. And he said, okay. And he said, make me 5 BSUs, branded status updates.
Did you know what a BSU was at that time?
I didn't know the terminology, but he was like, I think he was like, you follow me on Instagram, right? And I was like, of course. And he's like, all right, BSUs, also known as quote cards. He's like, make me 5.
How long was this? Like,
the conversation was pretty short. I stayed in the car for a few minutes, but I had nothing to say. And so I was just kind of like, okay, I guess I'll hop out now. And I remember hopping out, and D-Rock shook my hand and said, good luck. And then I walked into a Starbucks, like at the corner, and logged into the MailerMedia server where you could see all the clients. And I found Team Gary's tab, and I downloaded all the fonts and all the pictures that were in there, and then made the 5 BSUs. I don't even know if I was supposed to do that. I probably wasn't, but I was like, I need assets, right? So I went and I downloaded everything, and then I made the BSUs, and then I cut together a little video and sent it to D-Rock. And then the next week, it was supposed to be my last week, I get called into Claude Silver's office, and she says, starting tomorrow, you have a 1-month internship onto Gary. 2 weeks later, Gary was like, all right, we want you. And then I was on the team full time.
I think your portfolio was a lot more design, but I think you did more video.
Yeah, I was very much a designer at that era. Like, I had really banked my whole portfolio on design and had been operating as the design intern on like all these alcohol brands. And so I knew how to do a little bit of video, and I had made videos in the past, but it had been a really long time. And so in that meeting with Claude goes, you're starting a 1-month internship on Team Gary as a designer. And then on day 1, Andy K walks over to my desk, puts a hard drive, and says, edit videos. And I was like, oh no. And I had to go through this, like, I remember this 6-month crash course where it was like, go to work all day, and then all night I would watch Premiere Pro tutorials. And I was like, I have to become the best editor I can be, because this is what the job is now. And I was so scared of losing it, of like losing the job, losing the opportunity. And I was like, I have to make this work. Because I had burned bridges. I was like, I am not going back to Florida. I was like, I can't go back to school. Like, I'm like, this has to work. I had no other option.
For a second, the specific moment where D-Rock shook your hand and said, good luck, I think I want to give him some flowers. Like, I think you did a really good job with like early days for most people, including me, probably for you, but like, I've seen him around me. Like, he really makes people feel welcome. Like, he does a good job of that. I think he's really done that over the years for a lot of people. I think, yeah, early days. Like, he's very conscious of that. He does that with people all around.
We talk about this a lot because D-Rock and I's relationship has gotten like really good over the last couple of years. But he really is like the best. And he did, even though he and I butt heads aggressively many, many times, he was always extremely welcoming, especially coming in of like, I basically straight up in the car was like, I want D-Rock's job. You know what I mean? And so he still was like,
I mean, you asked for a designer job. It wasn't D-Rock's job.
That's true. That's true. But I knew it.
But I also like thinking of the team at that time. I think we had 2 people already designing on the team. So like, I really think you were being hired as a videographer.
Yeah. It was just like, this is the job you either figure out.
Only you to know that.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the time you were on the team, because I know Babin was longer.
Well, yeah.
With Gary or like Team Gary, like what was the most stuff?
I mean, I loved making DailyVee, and there was definitely an era of like how much Gary was traveling. It was super fun, right? I literally went around the world multiple times as a 23-year-old, and got to experience like watching someone at Gary's caliber like operate. So that was super fascinating. My favorite thing I probably worked on was like a handful of the K-Swiss projects. I forget what the campaign was called, but it's like, it was K-Swiss introducing the idea of K-Swiss being the shoe for entrepreneurs. So this is when I went and spent time with Karen Sybil and Elliot Tabelli of Fub Jerry and Anwar Carrots and like these Coco and Breezy, who were like DJs and sunglass designers. I went and I made stories around them and did like photo shoots with all of them. And I remember Then the O1 and O2s came out, which like I did a lot of stuff for those as well. But whenever G would go to like do these big announcement events at Shoe Palace in LA and things like that, all of the artwork that was printed in the stores was that campaign that I had done before of the sort of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, because the whole sneaker was around sneakers for artists.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, yeah, that very much. There's so many things. Also, like designing the crushing and cover, things like that. I mean, there's many highlights I can pick up, but the most fun, that K-Swiss campaign.
What was the one thing you wish you did differently?
I wish I would have spent more time developing relationships, both with people on the team and in VaynerMedia as a whole. It was intentionally so in the moment, Gary and D-Rock and Andy K, they were all like, you're good, put your head down and get as good as you possibly can. And so I did that. I very much I was like, this is my focus. I'm going to become the best editor I can, the best designer I can, and just purely put energy into work. And I definitely sacrificed building relationships and going to happy hours and things like that for an effort of I'm just going to go very insular and try and make the best work that I can.
Why do you think that's a common theme across Team Gary? I hear that from a lot of people.
I do think that the expectations are high. It's not an easy team to work on by any means. And so you are expected to work very hard. And I also think that, I know the team has changed and adapted a lot, especially I would say during that 2016 to 2019 run, which is when I was there. Gary was much louder and much more out there being GaryVee. And so there was a very competitive nature. All of us wanted to make the best videos or make the best VSUs or do this. And so I think that was probably a lot of it, was just, everyone was in their own their silo and making the work.
And competing with each other.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah. So,
which I also will say, probably one of the best things. It can be, it's two sides of a coin that is so tough to navigate, because being working super hard on a video, putting it out, and then D-Rock would see it and that would influence him to make a really good video. And then I would see D-Rock's video and I'd make a better one. And then, Irish would make a video and that would have a different take. And then we were all trying to level up, and it forced us to all get so good so quickly. And so on one hand, it's a bummer that it pulled away from relationships. The flip side is, I think being in that type of environment will force you to level up so much more rapidly than what the opposite would be of just you're by yourself putting out things every now and then.
Of that. Yeah, I think it goes back to a couple of things there, just one, you shooting your shot once you were told you didn't have a job. Yeah. Winners win. It's really that. You could have easily just accepted fate and moved on.
Yeah. I think the obstacle is the way, right? Which is I read that book, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, which is had a very profound impact. But I read that book during the weekend. So I got the notice of not having a job on a Friday. I sent Gary the email, and then I had the whole weekend to just think about what I was going to do. So I remember I applied to a bunch of other jobs. I'm
the weekend.
Yeah, I was I got to get a backup plan in case I can't figure this out. But I remembered during that time I listened to the audio book of The Obstacle is the Way. And that is just about turning trial and tribulations into, the motivation to move forward. And so, yeah, I think winners win. The obstacle is the way. You just have to plow through no's to get to the yes.
Because you never know.
Yeah. It's what's the downside?
Just, again, back to just the Team Gary part. What was the reason you decided to leave?
I will say, before I left, I tried a lot of different things. I was at, Vayner as a whole for 4 years. I think 2.5 of those years were specifically on Team Gary. And then I spent some time on Vayner Talent. And then there was also a period of time where Gary would just send me out on side quests to go do like production for other clients. And then I spent a lot of time at Timothy Wines building out, all the early content and like creative direction there. So I tried a bunch of different stuff, but I was getting a little bored and I wanted to change. And I also felt that, and I think Gary would even agree to this. During that era at Vayner, he was like, I want to find people that will slot into their roles and just like stay there.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to go do other stuff though.
Stay there for a short time, learn from there, then keep building on.
Yeah. But for me, I was just, I felt like I had tried a bunch of things and I felt like I wasn't learning a lot of new stuff. And it was just, I was starting to feel like I was kind of reaching a bit of a plateau. And so funny enough, at your wedding in India, I remember I'm thinking about all this stuff, thinking it might be time for a change when you're to like figure out what to do. We're in India and I get served an Instagram ad for this thing called the Adobe Creative Residency. I remember seeing it and I was like, this might be the thing I'm supposed to go to.
Explain the creative residency.
So
I know what it is.
Yeah, just the Adobe Creative Residency, it's changed a lot. The Adobe Creative Residency still exists, but in very different forms. At the time, Adobe would essentially make you an employee for a year. You would get a year of salary to purely focus on your personal work. And so I pitched them the idea of a documentary series, kind of adapting GaryVee as a style into, a way to go spend time with other entrepreneurs and designers and people that I was inspired by. And so applied to that, I got it. And so I left the team in May of 2019. Yeah. And then did that year with Adobe.
And how was that?
It was good. I learned a lot. I learned how different operating as a creative professional is within Gary's world and outside of it. That took some time to get used to. I messed up a ton. I also just, it kind of forced me to realize how much I didn't know myself, and how much I had to learn about myself. And so I remember like, it was almost a year of just like finding my way, just trying to figure out like who I was a little bit more. And then, that job is only a year. At the end of the year, you're done. And so I started that job in May of 2019, ended it in May of 2020, living in Manhattan. So all of a sudden, no money coming in, peak COVID in New York City, which was pretty terrifying. Luckily, one good thing I did is that technically, as a rule during the creative residency, you were not supposed to do outside work. You're not supposed to freelance. You're supposed to fully focus on your thing and the projects that Adobe gives you. Most people were still freelancing. I didn't, though. I said no to everything. So luckily, I had a long list of people that wanted to work with me during that year that I had turned down. And I started reaching out to them the second my Adobe contract ended. And so right away, I was able to basically fill up the rest of the year with client work.
And this is the time between this and Busan.
Yeah, so
That's the only other thing next.
Yeah. So I basically spent the next year, it was almost a year exactly, from May 2020 to May of 2021, just doing personal work, building out, that my plan is that the docuseries on YouTube was actually going pretty well. And so I was like, I might be able to turn this into a show and like that will be my job
From the Adobe time.
from Adobe.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't be around people anymore. And so the show just kind of like fizzled out and dies, right? I can't make a documentary series about artists if I can't like go to them and film them and like, tell these stories. And so I was sort of relegated to just making content within my apartment and my home. And I did that for a year. And, it was fine, but I still, the thing I think I've learned is like, it's been 9 years since I left home to like pursue a creative career. Right. And I'm learning how much I didn't know. And so now it's kind of funny because I'm just like, I'm still a child. I'm still learning so much. This is where like Gary, I think G, speaks on patience so much. So I'm like, there's so much I have to learn and still figure out. This is also say that during my year of like doing my own stuff, making branded content, I had a lot of fun, but I was also like, I got to learn more. I need to be around people who are further than where I am that I can embed myself with and become a better artist and better creative. And so May of 2021, I get a text from Mike Boyd. Mike Boyd runs like music partnership relations at VaynerMedia. He's the best. He knows everyone. He texts me in the morning and he says, "Do you mind if I get Hassan out your phone number?" I said, "Of course." And then that night, Hassan called me, and that led to basically a week of these like hour-long calls every night with Hassan, just like talking about ideas, what he wanted to do, what he was excited for, because this was the interesting phase in Hassan's career also, where his show Patriot Act had just ended on Netflix. He was getting ready to go out to start touring for his second live show, The King's Jester. And so he and I talked for about a week, and then I had moved to Portland, Oregon, flew back out to New York, met with him. We really got along, decided we were going to do this. Flew back to Portland, broke my apartment lease, sold all my furniture that I had just bought like 6 months prior, jumped in my car and drove back to New York in 2 days. And immediately started working with Awesome.
Love that. What is the one thing that you would tell a someone in their 20s right now who's thinking about, I'm in the wrong place, I need a change, and I'd love to burn some bridges and go chase my dream?
There is a quote from my good friend Tay Jarvis, who has had such a like profound impact on my career. But he says, the path you're on now and the path you think you should be on are probably closer than you think. And that's something I think about a lot, because it can be such a small period of time to completely 180 and change your life in so many ways. So true, right? Think about you, like having children, right? Your life of like having your first child versus the day after is like completely different. Second child, completely different, right? Same thing for me, like in changing my mind and going these different paths. If you make the decision that you want a completely different life and you just commit fully to that idea, I mean, we're talking literally like a matter of weeks to a couple months, your life can look 100% different than what it does now. I've learned this and executed against it many, many times. It's never too late to like make a change and completely flip everything you're doing.
One of my favorite pieces of content that you ever created for there was the Regret is Poison video. And a lot of people ask a lot about how has Team Gary changed, how, like, I think heavy hitters has always been consistent across our team. In fact, I made this statement yesterday, Friday, right? Yeah, yesterday, it was someone's last year on the team. We were talking about it. I was like, the one thing I think is consistent across the 10 years on the team is we're all very competitive. It is, everyone has their competition senses and different versions, but everyone's competitive. Like, no one's there to be a B player. Everyone's trying to be the best at what they do. And I think that really is the essence of the team. Like, and to me, I feel like that's a great place to work at. Like, that's like what you said, like, it's a great place to work at, because if you want to grow, that's a great place to work at. If you want to be where you're at, that's probably not a great environment for you, because it'll push you more than you want to be pushed.
For sure.
But if you want to grow, it's great to have people around you that can teach you and always push you in different ways. And what I want to try doing with this is really talk about how your dream job can just become a stepping stone to a much bigger dream in life. So, you know, being on Gary's team was like the thing to you at some point in your life.
Yeah.
And now there's so much more that has allowed you to do, and also just a part of your journey to where you're at today
Yeah.
because of you.
Yeah.
So once that was done, that chapter was done.
Yeah.
You took a risk, you did it, you left it.
Yep.
It became worse. What was the lowest point of your life after Team Gary? And what did you learn about yourself from that?
Yeah. I think two things. And I'm going to say this first so that I can marinate on the lowest point of my life. But you're completely right in that there was a point in my life where like the idea of being on Gary's team was the end goal. And whenever I was there, it was this all-encompassing part of my life where it was like, it was what my identity was, like everything was being on Team Gary. Now it's very funny to look back and be like, I've been away from Team Gary longer than I was on it now. And I'm 31 years old and I feel like I'm just now building this like insane momentum in my life and career. To pull a Gary or an Andy K, like it's brick by brick. And like, it's just these little incremental steps, to build off of. I've always, I am kind of a workaholic and it's very much work is a lot of my identity. And so work is what I attach myself to. And when I left Team Gary, I was very shielded from the world because of Gary. When I left Team Gary, I was like out on my own and was just like facing everything. And I realized for me, I was very, very affected by outside voices, by like strangers on the internet that I did not know. Anyone who had an opinion of me, I put far too much weight onto it. I didn't realize this in the moment because I had that GaryVee shield, right? When that went away, that sent me into a pretty deep depression personally. And I think, look, to give myself a little bit of grace, I think this was multiplied by COVID and things like that, of just being kind of trapped inside and not knowing what was going on. And so you just kind of become chronically online and like everyone's voice feels so loud. But I would say that, that year, 18 months post Gary world, I felt very small and it took a long time to build myself up and actually start building one, just like leveling out to baseline of like, okay, who am I? What do I do? All this stuff. And then build a person on top of that, which is like where I feel like I am now. What was the question? How did I do that?
What do you learn from it?
Oh, what did I learn from it? Life is long, I think almost to the point of what I was just saying, like you have so much time. And again, like Gary's world felt like it was everything. The period of time right after Gary's world felt like it was everything. And now I look at life of just like, everything's going to come and go. Whatever I'm feeling right now, like I feel like I'm at a great place right now. At some point this will fade, right? Like I'm going to go through another dark chapter at some point in my life. It is natural that it will happen. And then that will fade and something else will come and take its place. Yeah. And so I think that's the thing I've learned, that like this too shall pass. Like everything is going to come and go. And so not getting too attached to any one sort of moment, and not putting too much weight into one thing. Oh, and then I think if I'm speaking on how much outside voices affected me, just stop caring about anyone's opinion and just like do whatever you want to.
It's as easy as that, huh?
There's this song I really like right now by this artist, St. John. It's called Fuck Being Sad. And it's so dumb, but it really, to me, it at some point I was just like, I can't live my life worrying about these thoughts of strangers. And so many people say that they're like, don't worry about what people think. I think it's almost impossible to just turn that off. You just have to reach a point where the pain of holding yourself back from thoughts of strangers versus just like doing whatever you want to do have to just, it all has to hit this perfect equilibrium for you to truly stop caring about people's opinions of you. But yeah, once you stop doing that, life becomes a lot more relaxed.
It's back to what I was saying earlier. Diversify your happiness. It's a net happy day.
Yeah.
It's about that. Fuck being sad. Right? Cool. All right. I want to wrap it up with a common theme, which is, what would you say to any human in the world that does not need your advice right now, that is still listening to this podcast, and it is the core value in your life that you think if everyone understood, it can make their life better?
Create more than you consume.
Go more for that. Explain that. Create more on that.
Yeah, I think that I have learned that I generally feel my worst when I'm taking in way too much and not putting things out. And I don't just mean like, it's funny for me to say that when like I don't post anything on social media anymore, but I just mean like doing a creative practice to get things out of me as a person. And so be really cognizant of how much you're consuming, because also, today, like we've been talking so much about social media and hacking attention and getting attention. And I'm like, yes, I agree. But also like internally, I'm like, I also know that for me, I'm generally my best whenever I'm not on my phone and whenever I'm trying to put things out and like practice my art and my craft. And I think that so much of consumption has become like subconscious that we don't even realize quite how much we're consuming. And so it's like you're consuming fragmented information, which I think is even worse. So it's like, if you're trying to like watch a movie, but you're also scrolling and it's just like you're getting bits and pieces of all of it. And so create more than you consume and then focus on intentional consumption. So, read. If you're going to watch a movie, sit down and watch a movie. If you're going to scroll, like pick a thing, but try and maintain focus in one category of consumption at a time.
Love that. Because we live in a world where maximizing every minute has become a thing. Like I have this whole conversation that I was having with Janata recently, which is like, when did listening to podcasts while driving become a thing? Where you all used to be music.
Yeah.
Is the thing that you do when you're not consuming, right? It's your downtime. Now, maximizing every minute has become a thing. But like that now you're consuming a podcast while working out. Like, like music's being replaced with information.
Mm-hmm.
Then that is probably one thing that I feel like we're probably overdoing it at a certain level. And still half-baked thought on that. I'll go deep with alternate theory on that. I get it, but that's where I'm at. And yeah, I guess just to summarize like what you said, because to me, like the way that you just described it, I think radiating more energy than absorbing is important. I think that the net energy expense is outward is probably another way of saying what you just said, because for someone, it might be creating content. For someone, it might just be meditating. And for someone, it might just be playing a musical instrument and never recording it. Because but just it's a net energy spend that's external, then absorbed. I think that's probably how I would see it.
Yeah, I think that's like the exact way to look at it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can echo everything I just said. I do think just it's sort of, even if you think of it as like blowing air into a balloon, like you can only contain so much before you're going to pop. So that's at least the way I think about it, right? But then like letting air out is just like, it's keeping things in harmony and balance. And so, and also just doing things for the sake of doing that, because of right now, there's this, someone posted this thing. I wish I knew who it was, but it was basically like, would you do the activity you're about to do if you couldn't post about it? You know?
Yeah.
And that was almost why I intentionally, like, I've very much, like, I'm not very active on social media anymore. And it's kind of, I wanted to make sure I was making art for myself before I'm like distributing it, you know, and being okay with like just doing things for the sake of doing them. It doesn't all have to be for content and for making things, even though it's like literally both you and I do for a living. Yes, still my take, but yeah, create one you consume. Love that.
Cool. All right. So that was episode 1 of WhiteSpace. With the human that I feel is the most talented person that has ever worked on Team Gary. It's not more beyond. Like I would say that the most creative person that I know. And he's always been in my corner to a point where one of my favorite moments that I've shared with you off camera is when there was a part of Team Gary that was at my wedding. The person that was the most enthusiastic and had the best dance moves at my wedding was Babin. And it kind of made me realize at that moment, which was funnily enough 4 months before he left for Adobe, that you do everything with your full heart. You know, you either do it and give it your all, or you find a way not to do it. And intentionality, I think you said once in one of these conversations, because we've been talking for 4 hours now today, or something like that. I just feel like if the one thing that I could say about you that I would love the world to know about you, because again, there's never going to be enough time to like really understand a human fully.
Yeah.
Is that you're a good human that loves to bring stories to life. And you do it in a way where sometimes you don't even care about what's in it for you. And I feel like that is the best way to tell a story. And you have the natural instinct, which again, I love the skateboarding story, by the way. I know that you have the natural instinct to tell the best stories. And I wish that over the next few years, you can find the momentum and the rhythm to actually build something around you that can allow you to do it on a consistent basis. Because I don't want you to lose you. And the best version of you is when you're not hosting, but creating.
Yeah.
And we'll figure it out. But that's the future that I'm looking forward to.
Life is long.
Super long.